Welcome back, everybody. Get ready for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be exploring the world of selfish genes and meiotic drive.
Oh yeah, meiotic drive.
These are genes that basically cheat during inheritance, increasing their chances of getting passed down to the next generation, kind of like rigging a coin toss so that one side always wins.
Exactly.
And, it's not just a theoretical concept either. It's actually happening in many different species, even mice. And it can have some pretty significant consequences for evolution. So, to help us unravel all of this, we're going to be drawing on some pretty fascinating research
Yes.
from scientists who are studying meiotic drive and, like I said, mice, and also fruit flies. We're going to be taking some in-depth looks at two specific examples. One is the teeth haplotype, in mice,
Right.
and then the segregation distorter SD system in fruit flies.
That class.
So get ready to dive deep into the world of genetic competition. I'm really excited to have you all here. So let's start with the basics, just to get everybody on the same page. Can you give us a breakdown of how this meiotic drive actually works? How do these genes manage to cheat this system?
Well, instead of the usual 50-50 chance of inheriting a gene, these drivers, as they're called, can skew that ratio in their favor. They can manipulate a number of cellular mechanisms.
So what kind of mechanisms are we talking about here?
Well, it can be anything from interfering with the physical process of cell division to targeting specific parts of the genome. It's honestly a very diverse area of study.
So it's not like a single strategy. It's more like a whole toolbox of sneaky tricks, right?
Precisely. It really showcases the incredible adaptability of evolution.
I mean, that's kind of mind-blowing, right? To think that these genes have evolved these really sophisticated ways of ensuring their own survival, even if it means bending the rules a little bit.
Yeah, it really is fascinating.
Why should, the average person even care about meiotic drive?
Well, think about it this way. Meiotic drive can affect fertility. It can influence the evolution of entire species, and it's even informing the development of new technologies like gene drives that could have huge implications for, things like disease control or conservation.
Oh, that's right. I remember you mentioned gene drives earlier. So, we're talking about potentially using this knowledge to manipulate genes in a way that could benefit humankind.
Exactly. But it's also crucial to consider the ethical implications of such powerful tools.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, it's powerful stuff. It makes you realize that genetics is way more complex than just those simple Punnett squares we all learned about in high school.
Oh, definitely. Meiotic drive really challenges our understanding of how inheritance works.
Okay, so now that we've got a, basic grasp of the concept, are you ready to dive into some specific examples?
Absolutely. Let's start with the teeth haplotype in mice. That's a classic example of meiotic drive in action.
Perfect. Yeah, let's get into the teeth haplotype.
Okay, so the teeth haplotype, it's this selfish gene complex, right? And it's been around for a long time in mice. It's got some interesting quirks.
Quirks? What kind of quirks?
Well, one thing it does is it manipulates its position during cell division.
Like how?
So basically, it makes sure it ends up in the egg cell rather than being discarded. So it's increasing its own chance of getting passed on to the next generation.
Wow, it's really stacking the deck in its favor. But wait, if it's messing with such important processes, are there any downsides? For the mice?
That's the fascinating part. See, while this strategy gives the teeth haplotype, a transmission advantage, there could be a cost.
Uh-oh, what kind of cost?
It's kind of like winning a race but getting injured along the way.
Yeah.
You might win, but you might also suffer the consequences later, right?
Oh, I see. So it's kind of a trade-off. The teeth haplotype gets passed on more frequently, but the mice carrying it might have some problems.
Exactly. And this balancing act between drive and fitness costs, that's something we see a lot in the world of selfish genes. Evolution isn't always about perfect solutions. It's about finding the best possible balance.
So it's not just about winning, it's about winning and surviving, right?
Exactly.
Okay, that's super interesting. Now, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about another example, the segregation distorter, or SD system, in fruit flies. What makes this one stand out?
Well, the SD system is particularly interesting because it targets a different kind of genetic element. See, instead of going after a typical gene, it goes after these repetitive DNA sequences called satellite DNA, often found in large clusters throughout the genome.
Satellite DNA. That sounds familiar. Aren't those the highly repetitive sequences that are really hard for scientists to study?
You got it. They're like these long stretches of genetic code that can be super tricky to analyze. But in the case of the SD system, these repetitive elements, they're actually crucial to the whole thing.
Wait, so it's not targeting a specific gene? It's targeting these weird repetitive elements. That's such a strange strategy.
It is, and it makes understanding how SD works, well, extra challenging. It's kind of like having a puzzle with some of the pieces missing.
It's like trying to solve a mystery with like half the clues missing. No wonder it's been so hard to figure out.
Exactly. But despite those challenges, researchers have made some pretty remarkable progress. They've identified some of the key players in the SD system, but the exact mechanisms, they're still being investigated. It's a really complex process.
So we've got these two examples, right? The T haplotype and this SD system. They're both manipulating things to increase their own chances of getting passed on. But what about the rest of the genome? Does it just sit back and watch?
Oh, not at all. There's this constant pushback happening. Think of it like an ongoing arms
It's
race.
like a genetic battle.
Exactly. As these drivers evolve to cheat the system, the host genome, it's also evolving, right? It's coming up with countermeasures to try and maintain some kind of balance.
So it's like a constant game of cat and mouse, with each side trying to outsmart the other.
Absolutely. And this co-evolutionary arms race, it's a key part of understanding how selfish genes manage to persist over time. It's this constant tug of war, with each side trying to gain an advantage. And this isn't just some abstract concept. It's evident in the rapid evolution we see in both the FD system and the teeth haplotype.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific examples of this, arms race playing out.
Sure. So in the SD system, one thing we see is rapid evolution of both the driver itself, the selfish gene, and the responder satellite DNA, the target. It's this constant adaptation and counter-adaptation.
It's like they're locked in this like genetic tango,
Yeah.
each one trying to lead.
Precisely. And then with the teeth haplotype, researchers have speculated that a weaker spindle checkpoint in mice, this thing that's crucial for cell division, might actually be a result of past evolutionary pressure to suppress centromeric drive.
Wait, hold on. Back up a second. What's a spindle checkpoint?
Right, of course. So the spindle checkpoint is like a quality control mechanism during cell division. It makes sure that all the chromosomes are properly attached to these things called spindle fibers,
Yeah.
the things responsible for pulling them apart into the new daughter cells, kind of like a safety net to make sure everything divides correctly.
Okay, so it's making sure that no chromosomes get left behind.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is that mice might have this weaker checkpoint because of past battles with selfish genes. That's kind of a big deal, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting hypothesis.
Yeah.
It suggests that this evolutionary pressure from these drive systems can have a lasting impact on like fundamental cellular processes. Like these seemingly selfish actions, they can ripple out through the whole genome and affect all sorts of things.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, right? Like how one little gene can set off this whole chain of events.
Precisely. But, we've been focusing on mice and fruit fly so far. But this isn't just some weird quirk limited to these creatures. It's much bigger than that.
Oh, okay, so like how much bigger are we talking?
Well, meiotic drive has been found in all sorts of organisms, from plants and fungi to other animals. And by studying these systems, we're not just learning about some weird genetic quirk. We're gaining insights into fundamental biological processes.
So like these selfish genes are kind of doing us a favor by revealing how these processes work.
Exactly. For example, research on meiotic drive can help us understand things like how chromosomes are accurately distributed during cell division, which obviously is super important for life. And by studying, spermatogenesis, the process of sperm formation, we can see how these drivers are manipulating that process to their advantage.
That's pretty amazing. It's like they're giving away their secrets just by doing their thing.
Yeah, it really is. And this knowledge, it's not just theoretical. It's also got practical applications. Like, for example, research on these natural drive systems has been really important for developing engineered gene drive technologies.
Oh, that's right. Gene drives. We talked about that earlier. So these are tools that can like spread specific genes through a population way faster than it would happen naturally, right?
That's right.
Can you give us some example of how that could be used?
Sure. Imagine being able to engineer a mosquito population so that they can't transmit malaria anymore. Or imagine introducing a gene into an invasive species that makes them sterile, which would lead to their decline, and that would help protect native ecosystems. That's the kind of potential we're talking about here.
Oh, that's incredible. That sounds like almost too good to be true.
Yeah, I mean, it has the potential to be revolutionary, but like, it's not without its challenges.
Hmm.
Engineered gene drives, they raise some serious questions about responsible use, potential unintended consequences, and like who gets to decide how and when they're used. It's a really powerful tool that requires careful consideration.
For sure, for sure. I mean, it's like with any powerful technology, there are always going to be ethical considerations. You can't just focus on the good without thinking about the potential bad.
Exactly. But, even beyond those practical implications, selfish genes also give us this really valuable window into the evolutionary process itself. They show us how natural selection can work on individual genes within organisms, not just the organisms themselves.
Oh, that's a good point. It's like we're getting this like behind the scenes look at evolution in action.
Absolutely. There are these little evolutionary engines, constantly tinkering, experimenting, pushing the boundaries of what's
I've
possible.
never thought about it that way. Okay, this is all like mind-blowing stuff. So are you ready to like dig into some even more specific examples of meiotic drive in action?
Absolutely, yeah. Let's delve deeper into the research and see what else we can uncover about uh, these fascinating genetic rebels.
All right, let's do it. So now that we've got a good foundation, let's turn our attention to some recent findings that are making this whole field even more intriguing. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And to start, we should talk about this researcher, Takashi Akira, and his work on something called centromeric drive in mice. See, often we think of chromosomes as like the stars of the show, but even their tiny components can have a huge impact on inheritance.
Right. I remember learning about centromeres in biology class, but I never thought about them being involved in something as complex as meiotic drive.
Okay, so we've been on this incredible journey through the world of selfish genes. We've seen how they manipulate inheritance and drive evolution and even inspire these new technologies. It's been a wild ride.
It really has.
But I'm curious, like, what's the big takeaway here? Why should we even care about these genetic rebels?
That's a great question. And, there's so many reasons why understanding selfish genes is important for starters. They totally change how we think about inheritance. It's not just this straightforward passing down of traits from parents to offspring. Like we used to think there's this whole hidden layer of competition and manipulation happening at the genetic level. Yeah, it's like suddenly realizing there's this whole drama unfolding right beneath the surface of what we thought was a pretty simple process.
Exactly. Selfish genes force us to move beyond those basic Mendelian rules,
Hmm.
and really appreciate the dynamic interplay of all these forces. You got genes and genomes and evolution all interacting with each other.
I'm starting to see that, but besides just changing how we think about genetics, are there any real world implications of all this?
Absolutely. We've already talked about how this research on natural drive systems, it's paving the way for engineered gene, drives those powerful tools with the potential to revolutionize how we deal with things like diseases and invasive species.
Right, like the idea of using gene drives to wipe out malaria or control pests, that's super exciting. But I also
Yeah.
remember you mentioned some ethical concerns about this kind of technology.
You're absolutely right. Engineered gene drives are incredibly powerful tools, and like with any powerful technology, we need to carefully consider the potential risks and benefits and have those open discussions about how to use them responsibly. It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
It really highlights how scientific advancements, they always come with these ethical responsibilities. We can't just focus on the potential good without thinking about the potential harm as well.
I couldn't agree more. But beyond the practical implications, selfish genes also offer this amazing window into the evolutionary process itself. They give us these concrete examples of how natural selection works, not just on whole organisms, but on individual genes within those organisms.
So it's like getting a glimpse behind the curtain of evolution, seeing how it drives innovation and adaptation at the most basic level.
Exactly. Selfish genes are like these tiny evolutionary engines constantly tinkering and experimenting, pushing the limits of what's possible.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get why selfish genes are so important. But before we wrap up, can you give us a quick recap of some of the key takeaways from our deep dive today?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's clear that selfish genes, they're not just a fluke, they're everywhere. We've seen examples in mice, fruit flies, fungi, even plants. This tells us that genetic conflict is a fundamental part of life history, shaping genomes and driving evolutionary change across the entire tree of life.
That's pretty amazing to think about, this hidden battle happening in every living thing all around us.
It really is. And this battle, it's led to this incredible diversity of selfish strategies we've talked about, poison antidote systems and chromosome drive and bias segregation. It's amazing how evolution has come up with all these different ways for genes to act selfishly. It's really mind-boggling.
Yeah, it really highlights the creativity of nature, finding ways to ensure survival even down at the level of individual genes.
Exactly. Another important point is that all this selfishness, it often comes at a price. You see, while these strategies might help a gene get passed on in the short term, they can also have negative effects on the organism carrying those genes. This creates a delicate balance, between the drive of a gene to spread and the overall fitness of the organism.
So it's like this constant tug of war, right, between the selfish genes trying to win and the host organism trying to stay healthy and balanced.
Precisely. And it's this tension that fuels the ongoing evolution of these systems. It's always changing. But here's the final and maybe the most important takeaway. So selfish genes don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of these intricate, interconnected networks within genomes, so their actions can have ripple effects, influencing all sorts of traits and processes way beyond just their own transmission.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that in biology, everything is connected, even down at the level of individual genes. What one gene does can affect the whole system.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our exploration, the big message is the selfish genes. They're powerful forces shaping the evolution of life as we know it. They can be manipulative, they can be disruptive, but they can also be engines of innovation and diversity. It's a really fascinating and complex story.
This has been such an incredible journey. I never realized that something as seemingly simple as inheritance could be so complex and fascinating.
It's been my pleasure exploring this hidden world with you.
hmm
Hopefully this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you a new appreciation for the intricate workings of nature.
It definitely has. And for anyone listening who wants to learn more, there's a ton of information available online. Just search for selfish genes or meiotic drive, and you'll find all sorts of resources.
And remember, this is an area of active research with new discoveries happening all the time. Who knows what other secrets about selfish genes are waiting to be uncovered?
That's what makes it so exciting. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of selfish genes. It's been a real pleasure exploring this with you all. Until next time, keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep exploring the wonders of the natural world.